Election 2020 is drawing to a close. In a chaotic year with a chaotic presidential election, all eyes are turned to Pennsylvania, a crucial swing state, and the Lehigh Valley, a crucial swing region. So how are first-time voters breaking down the 2020 election? How are they making their decisions? And are they the key to showing us who might come out on top on election night? We'll be sitting down with 3 different first-time voters and walking through their process. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm your host, Sam Chen. Election 2020 is finally here. Amidst a chaotic year, all eyes are once again on the swing state of Pennsylvania and specific regions across the state, including our home base here in the Lehigh Valley, may hold the keys to the election. So how are first-time voters viewing this race? What's going through their mind? How are they assessing the candidates? We'll be sitting down with 3 first-time voters who are at different places in the process and having them walk us through their process. We begin tonight at Northampton Community College with Michael Fisher, who's a student at Northampton and is an undecided voter. Michael, welcome to Face the Issues.
Hello, sir. Well, it's great to be on the show.
It's good to have you. For full disclosure, Michael is a student of mine, an excellent student at that, and it is an absolute honor, Michael, to have you here with us. Let me ask you, you're an undecided voter, and what, at this stage in 2020, what is making you undecided?
I feel undecided, given, as you said before, this is a very chaotic presidential election, and given the options we have for this election, sometimes I don't feel like there is a right answer for me, given our current candidates. It doesn't seem like I have what I'd like personally in mind when I go and vote, so I don't feel like I have a set decision when I want to vote. And looking back when in the 2016 election, I had a similar problem as well, and trying to find that sort of representation is hard as a undecided voter.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Michael. As an undecided voter, what's your process when you look at these candidates? What is it? Their policies, past records, their plans for the future, their character? What do you put stock in? What do you put value in as you're assessing these candidates?
While all of those characteristics are extremely important for each candidate, what I look for personally as above all is definitely policy. Mm-hmm. While past records are a good way to see what a candidate is capable of, as well as their personality definitely puts an image for the America as a whole, I believe it's their policies is what gets things done. And when you look at their policy, that's how you know that that's the direction that your candidate that the president is going to be going, and that's what needs to absolutely be looked at, considering that that's how you know what they exactly are going to do and what they plan to do.
Right. So you're looking at where you stand on policy and compare it to where they stand. As you watch the debates and the speeches, Michael, what do you want to hear more of from these candidates? I don't feel like I hear enough of economic policy. Okay.
I feel, although I mainly am concerned mostly with coronavirus policies, and I think they are hitting the nail on the head with discussing that as the main topic, as that should be the main topic. But of course, me and many other voters everywhere would like to also hear more as well. I personally take economic policies into large consideration. I know a plethora of many voters take social issues such as LGBT rights, abortion issues. They're very, very hot topics, and those should always be taken into account for in all the debates.
Do you wish candidates would speak more candidly about it? Is there a frustration that they seem to beat around the bush with their rhetoric? Or do you feel like you're getting the answers you want out of them?
I feel like the candidates do evade questions, and they don't speak as clearly and consciously as I'd like for them to. I would personally, I want to see clear, straight answers about where they stand on issues. When candidates such as Joe Biden or Donald Trump beat around the bush, as you say, and don't tell the American people what exactly they're going to do about issues such as the coronavirus or healthcare plans, it creates a sense of nervousness and uncertainty about what these candidates are capable of, and I feel like that is a problem in trust with not just the president but like the government as a whole as well.
Oh, that's interesting. So even though we're focused on policy, their lack of policy plans speaks to concerns of capacity as well. Michael, let me ask you this. You're undecided. Are you considering third-party candidates as well in this process?
I would love to consider a third-party candidate, such as Joe Jorgensen of the Libertarian Party. However, because there's such a little base for the Libertarian Party currently, I cannot put it into consideration because of such a small chance that they even have a base in the general election. Okay,
and then how much? So, given that, how much did the Democrat primary in this year? Because the Republicans really, there was a few that ran, but really we knew from the get-go the Republican nominee would be President Trump. How much did the Democrat primary play into you being undecided? If a different candidate that's not Vice President Biden was the candidate, would it have been easier for you to make that decision?
I would agree with that. There was definitely a large mix of candidates you could have chosen from the Democratic Party. Personally, I would have chosen Andrew Yang out of the Democratic candidates. Having Joe Biden as our candidate, I see him definitely as an option, but I don't feel like he was the best option I could have possibly had as a voter.
So if Andrew Yang were the Democratic nominee, you probably would not be undecided at this point.
Yes.
Okay, so you were hashtagging Yang Gang through the primary.
Yes.
So let me ask you this then, what concerns you when you look at the country and at your community, for you as a first-time voter, as a college student, what are your primary concerns?
As a first-time voter in this current 2020 election, I have to be concerned about the coronavirus for sure. I have to know like each candidate's plans on how to combat it because I myself, I personally know friends and loved ones who could be adversely affected by poor policy regarding COVID-19, and were this to adversely affect them to the point of possible hospitalization or death in the worst case scenario, it would be an absolutely horrible thing to happen, and some blame would have to be put on public policy that was poorly executed.
Yeah, that's certainly understandable. Michael, closing thoughts here. I just want to kind of give you the floor. What closing thoughts do you have as far as this election goes, or really just anything else that you would want to add?
Regarding this current election, as chaotic as it is, and how uncertain a lot of people are about the election, like myself, the best thing you can do is take a moment, just breathe, think about your options, and vote as clearly and consciously as you need be. Because if you don't think about what you're doing, you're not going to see a good future for this country, and you need to make the intelligent and the right decision. I
think that's great advice. Slow down, think through, don't make an emotional decision. Very good advice, very wise advice for a first-time voter, from a first-time voter. Michael Fisher, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time and your insights. Certainly wish you the best as you make that decision. And we would love to have you back for a future episode, and appreciate you joining us.
You have a great rest of your day, sir.
You as well, Michael. Don't go away. When we come back, we'll be sitting down with Betty Bendor from Muhlenberg College, who is a Trump supporter, and talking through her journey as a first-time voter. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues, and we're sitting down now with Betty Bendor, who is a senior at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, Pennsylvania, also a first-time voter. Betty, welcome to Face the Issues.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it is good to have you. And let me just start with the general question. You are a decided voter, and who are you supporting in this year's presidential election?
I'm supporting President Trump for re-election.
Okay, and talk us through that process. This is your first time voting, and so talk us through that process. How did you come to your decision on who to vote for?
Yeah, so I mean, at least for me personally, I definitely am not somebody that was strongly in support of President Trump going into 2016. Not that I could vote in that election, but still I wasn't really quite sure. I wasn't really following the news as much. And I think from a personality perspective, I definitely think that he didn't quite come across as all that appealing when he first campaigned, and still now even. But I think at that point, he hadn't done a lot. He didn't really have a political background. He hadn't really shown like where his strengths could be as a candidate. So I think just kind of coming into that from a personality perspective, he didn't really have a lot to offer in that sense. But now I think over the last 4 years, I've really kind of been following a lot of his policies, a lot of the things that he's focused on, the different issues, the way he's approached topics. And I think from that perspective, he's really kind of won me over as a candidate, not just like from a conservative aspect, but as well as how he's kind of managed things in these 4 years. And now I think I can more definitely support him going into this election when I can actually vote.
Let me ask you about some of the things you just said. For you as a first-time voter, I mean, there's so many things to consider when you're looking at a candidate. Policy pieces, character, leadership.
Yeah.
What for you stands out? What's important to you as a first-time voter as you're evaluating this?
So I think kind of all those things that you just touched upon, the leadership aspect. And I think there are definitely policies that kind of appeal to first-time voters in their own personal way. So for me personally, I'm Israeli. That's my background. And so a lot of the different things he's done with the Middle East, those kinds of peace deals, a lot of that emphasis, I think that especially over these past 4 years, I've really seen that he is the best president that America has ever had in terms of relationships with Israel. We just saw this morning that there's that new peace deal that was brokered with Bahrain, and that involves Israel as well. So I think from that perspective, personally, he's very appealing to me, a candidate from that angle. And I think a lot of his economic decisions that he's done in terms of COVID, I think in a lot of ways he has not been that kind of appealing as a candidate. I disagree with a lot of the different things he's done in terms of coronavirus. I think the kind of the outlook that he's presented towards it a lot of times has not been most favorable in terms of like not wearing masks and those kinds of things. And while I do think that's concerning, as president, he has done good things in terms of the economy. And I do recognize that that's very important. So I think there's almost a difference between some of his rhetoric that comes across at times and also seeing like what actual actions is he taking, what is he doing for the country, what is he doing in terms of interacting with foreign leaders. And that's all very important to kind of weigh those considerations together.
One of the things that you're doing, Betty, is you're not just blanketly coming in and saying you agree with everything the president's doing. And just a few minutes here, you said, well, I agree with this and I disagree with that.
Definitely.
How much did the Democrat primary play into your decision? Is your support for the president in large part because he's running against Vice President Biden? Were there Democrats on that stage that you might have given you pause or made you more undecided in this election?
I think there's almost two aspects to that question. So on the one hand, no, like in terms of do I support him just because he's running against Joe Biden? No, I don't think I disagree with Biden to enough of an extent that would kind of push me in that direction. I do think there's enough about President Trump himself as a candidate that I agree with. I think there were some favorable, relatively moderate voices that we heard from maybe Klobuchar. Even Biden himself at times presented more moderate. So I think in that sense, like a lot of their different policies and things they would talk about, I found to be agreeable. On the whole, I don't think I would necessarily support any one of them over President Trump as a candidate for those reasons that I've talked about. And I think part of that even has to do with the partisanship that's created in this country right now, which I think is problematic in and of itself, right? Like the considerations that we have to weigh is when we're voting for a president, we're not just voting for the president themselves, but the cabinet that they bring with them. Who are the other politicians that they work with? Who else do they support? So I think in that case, because of how divided everything's become in this country, we do really, like, unfortunately, when we vote for a president, we're also voting for all of the other members of their party in that sense. And as problematic as that may be, that is the truth kind of behind the matter.
Sure. And then also, Ben, let me ask you this: as a first-time voter, what you, as a student too, when you look at the country and you look at your community, what concerns are of priority to you?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, in terms of current concerns, COVID is obviously one of the largest concerns there is for anyone as a student, in terms of going into, like, I'm thinking about going into dental school, all of these different aspects that are kind of being weighed. It is kind of concerning to think about what does this mean going forward for us as students. Like right now, I'm in the remote learning environment, everything's online. Like, will that be permanent? Will we ever be able to go back and engage with other students? How is that going to be weighed going forward? But aside from that, what I think is really concerning in terms of like college communities, university communities, is how partisan things have become. And I really see this now this election season, where there's such this culture of like driving the vote, right? Like on my campus and on campuses everywhere I've heard, like there's such this emphasis on like go out and vote, go out and vote. And I think a lot of times there's almost this pressure behind like what you're supposed to be voting for, like who are you voting for, that almost drives that narrative more so than like, let's sit down and have a discussion about like, what are the policies this person presents? What are the policies this person presents? And I think that was really highlighted in yesterday's debate, is that a lot of times what things are boiling down to is a narrative of like personalities, one over the other, as opposed to any substantive discussions on the actual issues that are facing, like not just students, but the larger communities as well.
I'm really glad you brought that up, and I actually just want to kind of piggyback off that and ask you this. There's a lot of conversation on substantive debate versus kind of the one-liners and the zingers that that perhaps the first presidential debate was a little bit more known for.
Definitely.
As a student and with your peers, I mean, is there a hunger for the substance? What kind of conversations are you having on campuses? Is it a lot of just partisan bickering, or do you see there some room and some hunger for more substantive, introspective debate?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, like, it wouldn't be fair of me to say that it's only ever one way or the other, right? Like, there's obviously, depending on who you're talking to and what kind of context on campus, there is a difference. A lot of the narrative, unfortunately, I have seen is drawn like just towards personality or just towards like partisan, like party politics. So in that sense, it becomes easy almost when you're talking to people to automatically get into this debate of Trump versus Biden in terms of he's a horrible person, no, he's a horrible person. And I think that's problematic in and of itself. As kind of connected to what you said, there is that hunger. So I've talked with a lot of my friends. They are kind of focusing, okay, he has this perspective on healthcare, but he's lacking in these other senses on the economy, or vice versa. So I think there is kind of that quiet demand for those kinds of discussions. But I think because of how partisan everything's become, it's almost hard to get to the point where we can admit that we want to have those discussions, just because as soon as people start coming out and saying they're voting for this person or this person, it kind of drives a partisan wedge that hinders, unfortunately, any further discussion.
Well, I think that's very a sage observation and good advice, and keep doing what you're doing, because I do believe that those substantive conversations at the end of the day shed more light than heat, and that is where we need to go. So. Betty, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your insights. Very valuable. My pleasure.
Thank you.
No, my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and congratulations on your first time voting in the presidential election.
Thank you.
We would love to have you back for a future episode.
I'd love to be back. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. And don't go away. When we come back, we'll be sitting down with Shauna Campanero, who is also a first-time voter voting for Vice President Biden, and we'll be talking about her process to get to where she is. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues, and we're joined now by Shauna Campanero, a student at East Stroudsburg University, who is also a first-time voter, and she joins us now. Shauna, welcome to Face the Issues.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm hanging in there.
Good, good. I think that's as good a response as you can expect in 2020.
Yeah, it's very true.
Now, Shauna, you are a first-time presidential election voter, and you've made up your mind. Who are you supporting in this fall's presidential election?
I will be voting for Joe Biden.
Okay, and let's just talk through this process. At what point did you know you were going to vote for the vice president, the former vice president, and what brought you to that decision?
I feel like personally for me, just seeing how Trump handled COVID, it just really hit home for me, and it made me realize that he really isn't good at resolving what our country needs. And I feel like with the experience of Joe Biden and all the previous experience that he has, I feel like that he will lead our country into a better place.
And, you know, when you make this, when voters look at decisions, there's a number of things that go into their consideration. I'm curious, as a first-time voter in the presidential election, will you consider public policy or leadership capacity, character, plans for the future, past voting records? What was it for you that was a priority in looking at these candidates?
So for me personally, I just view Donald Trump as an extremist. And I'm not saying that because, you know, I'm Democrat, Republican. I just view him as someone who has extreme views on policies, has a very strong personality, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I just feel like looking at the other side as well, like even if Bernie was on the ticket, I couldn't see myself voting for him either. I just feel like Joe Biden is in the middle. I feel like he is understandable. He has the experience. He's been in politics for 40 plus years. And I just feel like he's very more qualified for the position.
And so let me ask you, you just brought up Bernie Sanders, the senator from Vermont. And so he ran for president in 2016 and again in 2020. And you were just saying that if he were the nominee, you may not be voting for him. So for you, the 27 or how many ever Democrats ran for the Democratic nomination, for you, this was not a no matter who comes out, I'm going to support them.
Yeah, exactly. I just think that since our country is such a big melting pot of so many different people, I think that having extreme views on either side, whether you're left or you're right, just isn't what our country needs right now, especially in the condition that we are in, like COVID, racial injustice, stuff like that.
So, Shauna, for you then, as a voter, is it fair to say that you're really evaluate candidate by candidate, that there's no guarantee in 4 years from now that you're not a lock for the Democratic candidate 4 years from now?
No, absolutely not. And that's what everyone's very shocked, because I'm very open in saying I'm registered Republican, and everyone's like, you crossed the ticket this year. You're like very top of your ticket is crossed. Then I'm going to stay crossed like that, I feel like, for the rest of my life. I don't think I will ever vote straight Republican or straight Democrat.
True. And you're a Lehigh Valley native, and that is, the true mark of a swing voter, someone that will go between the parties. Let me ask you this: how much of a factor did how much of a factor has the Democratic primary, but also the election since playing out? How much of a factor has that been for you? Was this a thing where when the vice president became the nominee, you were, okay, this is my candidate now? Or was it you really kind of wanted to see the landscape play out between the campaigns, the conventions, the debates before you made that decision?
I feel like it definitely wasn't a thing that I was set on at first. But like I said before, I just feel like watching Trump handle the current state of our nation, it just really solidified for me that Biden has the qualifications. He definitely, in my opinion, is just overall more rounded as a person. So I just felt like once I heard that he was the candidate, I definitely started leaning more that way. And then it was really when I saw how Trump handled things, I was like, yeah, this is definitely how I'm going to vote.
Let me ask you about down ballot. And obviously the presidential race is not the only race that's on the ballot. There are races for Congress. This year in our home state of Pennsylvania, there's not a governor's race, there's not a senator's race, but there's a race for Congress. Your representative where you are is Joe Emmerich, who's a Republican. He is up for re-election. Is this something where you see yourself ticket splitting, that you will vote for Vice President Biden at the top of the ticket, but you would switch back over and vote potentially for a Republican down the ballot? Or are you straight blue, vote Democrat this fall?
No, I'm 100% a split ticket. You mentioned Joe Emmerich, 100% has my vote, especially because he's a Bangor native, so I have to support my hometown there. But again, kind of relating back to the whole Joe Biden thing, Joe Emmerich, very well-rounded as a person, and I just feel like it's what our country, what our local system just really needs. So I feel like for me personally, I go where I think that our nation as a whole is going to benefit, not necessarily just me individually.
And do you feel like your classmates, I mean, you're young, you're a college student, do you see this among your classmates? Do you believe that they are traditionally looking at the candidate and evaluating person by person? Or do you see the opposite where there's a lot of partisan party line pulling? What do you see when you talk with your peers?
I mean, for me personally, I feel like a lot of students nowadays don't really have the time to sit and actually be truthfully educated on political science. So I feel like with my classmates that are educated in political science and have a little bit of a background and an understanding of how it works, I feel like I do see a lot of cross, boundary voting in the elections. But for people that don't really have the education behind it, I feel like they just go into the polls, they hit the button for one or the other, and they just walk out.
Last question, Shauna. I mean, for the country, as a first-time voter, as a college student, when you look at the country and when you look at your community, what concerns are a priority for you?
I mean, basically, the two things that I can really pinpoint are equality is one of them. Whether that be because of gender, whether that be because of race, anything like that. I just feel like with everything happening, we do need more equality. And also probably the second thing is definitely climate change, which I know is a very controversial topic. But for me personally, I do think that it is a real thing. And I feel like we need to start taking steps into coming up with an action, coming up with a plan, because I don't want to see this earth just go.
Sure. Well, Shauna, thank you for your insights. Thank you for joining us and for shedding insight, I think, into what a lot of people know, but don't always realize that we are, as people, we have our own ideas. We are complex. And sometimes we do split our tickets. And I appreciate the insight that you're sharing with us. And we'd love to have you back for a future episode as well.
Sounds good to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. That is all the time that we have tonight. My thanks to Michael, Betty, and Shauna for joining us. And thank you for tuning in as well. My name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.